So, for the first issue, this is the hierarchy code prior to 1st January 1987 in the first era. And this is the second era, during period 1st January 1987 to 23rd June 1994. And this is the third era, 23rd June 1994 until today. For the issue number 2, the application of doctrine from a higher court to a lower court is called vertical stare decisis. For example, in the first era of public prosecutor and Dato Tan Cheng, they say that the federal court accepts unreservedly and which expects the higher court and other inferior court in common law systems such as ours to follow similarly. In the second era, it's a duty bound to follow the precedent set by the federal court. And for the third era, it is necessary for each lower tier to accept loyally decision of the higher tiers. The issue number 3, the vertical binding effect is central to doctrine, while the horizontal effect is not. In some jurisdictions, decisions of court of coordinate jurisdiction are binding. In others, they are not. For example, in era number 1, Privy Council, decision binding towards both court. In era number 2, Supreme Court, binding to federal, the Supreme Court is not bound of decisions by the Privy Council, not bound by its own decision. Era number 3, decision Privy and Supreme bound, federal court not bound by its decision. The horizontal operation of the judicial president means that court would hold itself binding towards its own previous decision, the decision of its predecessors and courts that are of coordinate court jurisdiction. Thus, in Malaysia, the superior courts are bound by their own prior decisions, and decisions of court they are on the same level, regardless of whether in the past or in the present. We can refer to the case of Malaysia National Insurance v. Lim Seok and the case of Tan Boon Kian v. Public Prosecutor. For the issue number 4, decisions of the Privy Council given on appeal from Malaysia or from another Commonwealth country where the law is in pari materia to Malaysia are binding on the Malaysian courts. For the issue number 5, decisions of the Federal Court, the highest court in Malaysia, are binding on all courts below it, in the same way as the House of Lords of England, now the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom, was not bound by its own decisions. The Federal Court is not bound by its own decisions.
For the sixth issue, according to Williams and Joyce, in general, the Supreme Court is not bound by its own decision, but there are some circumstances where it can depart from them. For example, if a previous decision was based on outdated or incorrect information, the Supreme Court may choose to depart from it. And regarding the decision of the Privy Council, the Supreme Court is not bound by those decisions. However, decisions of Privy Council are not binding on UK Supreme Court, and it is free to depart from it if it chooses to do so. As for the seventh issue, the Court of Appeal is bound by the decision of higher court, including the Federal Court. However, this was subjected to 3 exceptions. The first one, the court may choose between conflicting decisions. If its prior judgment, albeit not expressly reversed by the Supreme Court of the UK, cannot stand with the subsequent court decision, the Court of Appeal must decline to adopt it, and it needs to follow its own per curiam determination. The Court of Appeal also has a predecessor court which was typically a law court with a more limited jurisdiction. For example, in England and Wales, the Court of Appeal was preceded by the Court of Appeal in Civil Division. For the eighth issue, the predecessor court of the present Federal Court in Malaysia and the Supreme Court and the Privy Council in England. The Federal Court is not bound by the decision of the predecessor court, as it is a separate and independent court with its own jurisdiction and authority. However, it may consider the decision of its predecessor court as persuasive authority in its decision-making process. The Federal Court is bound by its own precedent under the doctrine of the stare decisis. In the case of Semeni Jaya Center and Berhad, this case shows that the Federal Court in Malaysia is not bound by the decision of its predecessor court, and it has the power to depart from the previous decision when it considers necessary to do so. As for the ninth issue, High Court is strictly not bound to follow its own previous decision, but they are highly persuasive. One example, in the case of the public prosecutor against Kok Wah Kwan, the High Court noted that it was bound by its own previous decision and therefore had to follow the same reasoning and conclusion in the earlier cases. The High Court in this case emphasized that as a court of coordinate jurisdiction, it was bound by its own decision and could only depart from them in exceptional circumstances where had been change in law or new fact had emerged. And for the last issue, perimaterial means dealing with the same subject matter where 2 or more statutes are in perimeteria, which may be interpreted by reference to the others. Per curiam is a decision reached by careless stress or mistake and can be avoided. Stare decisis refers to the doctrine of the judicial precedent Res judicata is basically similar to the criminal law concept of double jeopardy but in civil law setting, and binding precedent is a precedent which must be followed by all court under common law legal system.